Welcome, everyone, to the December 10th Eugene City Council work session. Welcome to everyone here and at home. First thing up this evening are committee reports or other items of interest people want to talk about. So I'll just start around the table with Councilor Farr.
I'll pass, Mayor.
All right. How about you, Chris?
I'm okay for now. Thanks.
Okay. Alan?
I don't have any of this committee.
Well, there you go. We're just going to be quick. Mike?
Pass, Mayor.
Betty?
I've been to two human rights events in the last week, one at the atrium, which was very well done. Kitty spoke very well, and then had to go to another meet. The mayor, excuse me, for calling you by your name. And anyway, she made a good speech before she left.
Thank you.
And then today at noon there was a meeting in this room, which was mainly about health care, but health care as a human right. And this place was packed at noon today. Maybe that's why there's no one here tonight. They're all tired of meeting. Or maybe
They're working up to 7:30.
The rest.
7:30 meeting, I'm sure. I attended the National League of Cities convention in Boston, and I spent a lot of the time at the board meeting and the resolutions committee, both of which I'm on, and we hired a new executive director. We talked about places for future meetings. We elected officers. And while I was there, I heard good things about the mayor and about John, the city manager, about John's veterans housing and your work, mayor's work with after-school programs. Heard about after-school programs that give 3 meals a day, some places, plus many hours in the building for people who need it, which was very interesting. I attended our new president of the NLC is a very interesting woman. President Obama has mentioned her in a speech before. You may have heard about her before, but she was very emotional when she made her acceptance speech for the presidency. She said we were running out of time because we had big controversies over fracking. And end of the business meeting, and the second vice president, the first vice president said they wouldn't speak because there was no time. And she said, "I've been waiting too long for this." And she started by telling us about her grandparents who came here from Mexico and were farm laborers. Her grandfather was killed in a machine accident. Her grandmother, in addition to picking cotton, had to take in laundry from a resort. And she said, "Stir it." I remember my grandmother washing clothes that way over a big pot over a fire, stirring it with lye. And then her mother, same thing happened to her mother. They were laboring in the farm, and her mother also each of them had 3 little kids, and she was one of the little kids at the time. And her father died, her tractor ran over him. So again, the pattern repeated itself. And she said, "And what do you think about my generation? Did that repeat itself?" "No," I'm standing here in front of you. And she's the mayor of a city in Arizona. The city hall sits on the site where she used to pick cotton as a child. So it was a very interesting story. I'm on the University Communities Council Steering Committee, and we talked about social host ordinances at that. In Moscow, Idaho, all they do is measure the noise level. They have a machine that measures decibels, and that's the only thing they control is noise. And in Waco, Texas, Baylor is between 2 main highways, and there are no people living there, so they just let the students have as many parties as they want to and don't worry about it. And other people are very concerned, and there are various degrees of concern and of control. I think that's enough for now. Nobody's timing me, so I could talk all night. There's the timer person.
But you chose not to.
Chose not to, yes.
Thank you. George?
I don't have anything to report from Metropolitan Wastewater Management. We didn't meet last month, and so I believe we all got a update of all the projects from Michelle. So I want to take this opportunity to, I emailed everybody. The mayor asked me to work on a policy for filling vacancies. midterm vacancies on boards and commissions, so I crafted something and ran it by Glenn Klein, and he vastly improved it and made it much clearer and much more complete. So I'd like to go ahead and make that motion now. I hope everyone had a chance to read it, but I'll just read it out. I move that the policy to fill vacancies on boards, committees, and commissions which occur outside the regular recruitment period be as follows. 1. The council shall fill a vacancy on boards, committees, and commissions occurring 90 days or more prior to the end of a term by a candidate from the pool of active applicants for the board, committee, or commission. Such a candidate shall be nominated by the mayor unless the Eugene Code provides for a different procedure for nomination. Number 2, if there are no applicants for the vacant position, the city shall initiate a special recruitment to solicit applicants for the position. 3, the candidate appointed by the council shall serve for the balance of the unexpired term. 4, if the vacancy occurs less than 90 days prior to the end of a term, the appointment for the vacant position shall be filled in the next regular recruitment cycle.
Second, and speak.
Moved and seconded.
Just a clarification, it is nominated by mayor and approved by council.
Yes.
Anybody else have any issues about that? Okay. Ready to vote on it? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor and none in opposition. It passes. Thank you. So
Okay.
we now have a process. I appreciate
Yes,
it very much.
I just want to say that I was kind of surprised in talking with some of the staff that helped me with this. We didn't really have a policy. I always thought that we did, but we didn't, so now we do. Thanks, everybody.
I want to just say that today, staff had a Human Rights Day celebration over at the Public Works Building, and some staff members everybody was recognized for the work they do day in and day out to better the support for human rights in our city. But in particular, I think there were 6 different individuals or groups that were recognized for their work, and maybe we can send that out to everybody so they can see who was recognized. That would be great. But it was Bob Bussell spoke about immigrants, and it was there was a great little film and a large number of folks there. It was very, very nice. John, did you have anything you wanted?
Just a couple things. One, make sure you speak close enough to the microphone. That's where the volume will come from. These, I think, are a little bit different than we've had before, and hopefully they'll work better.
I was backing up so we wouldn't get feedback, but
So have to be a little bit closer.
Okay.
And just along the human rights theme, I was going to mention that as well, which was a nice event, but also as I sent out to you this afternoon, we actually were nicely recognized in a pretty significant report that's come out real recently around human rights and human rights cities. And so I sent that to you, and Eugene was called out in this national publication for some of the work we're doing around human rights. So that's a real positive.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to our main item for the work session today, and that is financial strategy. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll be working through a presentation that's up on the screen. I'll get us started. We have Gary Manross here as well, who will provide part of this presentation. And you'll remember Gary, we've used him before in some polling around our street bonds, particularly, and we're very successful with that. So he'll be coming up and spending a little time with that. Before we do, I want to get us just a reminder of where we are with respect to our budget plan of action that I sent to you over the weekend that I'll be talking about today. And today we're not asking you to make any formal motions. What we really would like is for you to essentially say, yes, keep working in the direction that we're going, and unless you give us contrary direction, we will continue to flesh these out and come back to you in January with much more details and opportunities to actually take some action around those. So quickly, the agenda for today, you can see that a little bit about where we are framework that we've been working towards for the last 4 years. The plan of action, I'm going to review the survey results coming from Gary, and then we'll kind of talk about where we're headed from here. And just as a reminder, and you've seen a couple of these graphs before, but our basic challenge is our revenue growth has slowed. And I'll show some graphs here in a minute that talk about on the expenditure side. But from FY03 to FY10, our property tax, which you might remember makes up about 66% of our general fund revenues, and we're talking the general fund here, grew at a little over 4% per year, and then beginning in FY10 to the current, it's down to around 2% per year. So it's been cut in half. And so that combined with our other revenues have not been increasing and have actually decreased. You can see starting in FY08 and then flattening out. The combined total of that is a pretty significant impact on the amount of revenues that we have been receiving into the city and anticipated going forward. So our revenue growth has slowed significantly, and the result is there's a $6 million gap over the forecast period for the next 6 years. And what this means is that our expenditures are outpacing the revenues, and in order to live within our means, to create a balanced budget, there's a $6 million gap that needs to be filled. And that's what this represents right here as we go forward. We've used this graph often, and really what this says from our perspective is if we don't do anything to fill this gap, that red dotted line represents our savings account. And you can see within about a year, 2 years, our saving account is gone, and by the time we move out into FY19, we're actually $30 million into the hole. And obviously, we're not going to do that. We can't do that. And so the question is how we're going to prevent that from occurring. We've also show up there that we do have an 8% reserve target. And the importance of that reserve is, one, to allow us to moderate and transition across from year to year. So as we get bumps in our revenues or expenditures, we have one-time money to draw upon to help us mitigate those from year to year. They also allow us, if there's any particular time where there's a significant event, it's money that we can draw back up on to deal with that. 8% is a very responsible, reasonable reserve. That's our target. And so the $6 million gap includes ensuring that we maintain that reserve at about 8%. I should mention the $6 million gap is really the ongoing gap. You might remember there are some one-time expenditures in this year's budget that are not included in the forecast going forward. And I'll talk more about that, but those are, the fire company was a one-time expenditure. There's some homeless services that you've just approved, obviously, are only a one-time expenditure. There are part of the annual Human Services Commission appropriation are one-time expenditure. So I just want to make sure we're clear that the $6 million gap is the ongoing expenses and doesn't include those. Those represent another $1 million to $1.5 million to $2 million. That would be above and beyond if you want to turn those into ongoing expenditures. But we've done a lot to date over the last 4 years to achieve and to continually maintain a stable budget. And so we have lived within our means. Every year we come back. There's been a gap. We've come back with expenditure reductions. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But we come back every year. We've lived within our means. We haven't been raising taxes, and we continue to invest in our community, whether it's in the road fund, whether it's police services. We've been investing in economic development downtown and some of those kinds of things. And we also have minimized our impacts to the community services. So there's lots been going on to get to this point. More specifically, we've cut $24 million from the general fund budget, and putting that in context, the general fund is $120 to $125 million, so this is about 20%, and that's pretty significant. And we've minimized impacts. There have been some impacts to our services, particularly in this year. We've talked about parks maintenance, and more significantly, we reduced hours at the branch libraries over the past couple of years. We've reduced the number of collections and materials that we purchase at the library. So there have been some impacts over the last 4 years, but we've worked really hard to try to minimize those. We've eliminated more than 100 positions, continuing to shrink the footprint. And part of what this is all about is to get a structurally balanced budget, recognizing that it's just not a small blip in time, but that we fundamentally have to structure the budget differently, and that has required a reduced footprint. We have maintained the prudent reserves that I talked about just a moment ago, and we have continued to ask staff to be very innovative. We found new partnerships for finding efficiencies, and we'll continue to try to do those kinds of things. But we have continued to maintain a balanced budget. We've been living within our means. We haven't been raising taxes. We've been investing in the community. And this is how we've been going about doing that through this last 4 years. And this graph, I think, is very telling. What this says is from FY03 to FY09, our annual expenditures in our general fund operating budget, and that's really the budget we're talking about, increased at an annual growth rate of 6.2%. Over the last 4 years, we have really driven down that cost curve, and so the annual increase has been 0.6% in our expenditure. During that time, we've also had to absorb the library levy, and of course, you know, there's been significant increases in PERS costs at the same time. And so went from 6.2% average annual growth down to 0.6%. That's getting at a structurally different budget. And so going forward, regardless of what we do with new revenues, yes or no, we still need to maintain that kind of a growth rate in order to ensure that we have a structurally balanced budget going forward. And the community still wants us to accomplish some things, and these are the one-time funding I was talking about. Fire company, there's a Human Services Commission, a portion of that is one-time funding. Homelessness funding, the Buckley House is one-time. Actually, that was over a 2-year period. Same with gang prevention. And there's some economic development portions around loan fund and some other dollars that are one-time funding. And this represents $1.5 to $2 million. And this is in addition to the $6 million gap. So part of would be is if we want to continue to maintain these services going into the future. You've seen this chart the last couple of times. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but really what it says is this is what our strategy and action or plan has been for the last 4 years. Live within our means, encourage development, appropriate development to increase the tax base. We want to do more of that, but we still want to invest in the community, whether it's streets or property crime or downtown or Envision Eugene, those kinds of things. Continue to look for efficiencies and partnerships to drive down that cost curve. And the new element this year is our conversation around new revenues. So here's our proposed plan of action for FY14. It's not, it hasn't been put together in a vacuum. We have been out in the community over the last 3 years in a variety of conversations around Eugene counts and surveys. Envision Eugene, as you know, is an extensive outreach process. Meeting the Challenge Task Force, lots of budget committee discussions, and then the surveys, the most recent one in November, which Gary will talk a little bit about in just a minute. So here's what our goals are for FY14. We need to fill the gap, maintain our services, strengthen our economic prosperity for the long-term stability, and then provide for future financial stability as well. There's 4 action steps that we're proposing. The first is that we need to grow the property tax base, and this is really a longer-term conversation. What we will suggest is the target is $250 to $500 million over the next several years, and it would be in support of all the goals that we've talked about through Envision Eugene. And on your supplemental budget tonight, there are a couple of items that actually start to relate to this. One of those is putting some one-time monies into expanding our loan program. Another part is putting some additional dollars, one-time dollars into our job creation pool that actually the council approved 2 years ago as part of their budget appropriations. And so putting a little bit more money in that to try to move towards this. If we wanted to close the gap by growing the property tax base only, we would have to grow it by about $1 billion of new assessed value. And this is not the kind of value where every year you can bump up your property tax by 3%. This is new assessed value, redevelopment or development on property within inside our city limits. And so it's one for the long-term stability. Financially, we need to ensure that we're doing this. So that's our first action step. This will not close the $6 million gap over the forecast period. Our second is we will continue footprint reductions. We will continue not only this year, but in multiple years to find efficiencies and new partnerships that we are able to find. And we will always find some. But we're not going to be finding $6 million worth of efficiencies without significant major impacts on services. And so we are at that point of gone about as far as we can go with this without significant impacts. 3 and 4 are the ones that I think may generate a little bit more conversation. Number 3 is to transition the parks or the general fund portion of our parks O&M budget over to the stormwater fund as a flat fee. On number 3 and 4, we don't have all the details yet worked out. There's a lot more that would have to be put together before we come back with a specific proposal. What we're really interested in tonight is to get your feedback and then your go-ahead to start filling in all the blanks. But this would do a couple of things. One, it would free up dollars in the general fund to help maintain services within the general fund. It would also provide some stable funding for parks maintenance by virtue of being able to have those dollars identified. And we would anticipate this as part of the stormwater fee would be charged through eWeb. I should also say we've had some conversations with eWeb staff, but they have not, nor has the board taken action on our ability to collect this or the next fee we'll talk about through their billing. So there's more conversations that would have to be done through that. But this would provide a more stable funding for parks maintenance now and into the future, and it's a flat fee as opposed to a variable fee, which is how stormwater is charged now. So the stormwater would have 2 components. What is currently charged out, the second component would be a flat fee for parks maintenance only. And then the fourth part would be actually a new fee that would go out to the voters. And the purpose of this fee would be to maintain what we have and avoid further cutbacks in services, whether they're public safety, recreational, library, or parks, or any of those kinds of fees. So it would be putting in a modest fee. As Gary, he'll talk about this in a minute, why we got to $10 per month. And putting a cap on will become important. We've talked about, like in the past, with oversight committees and those kinds of things. So that would be also an important part of this. So those are the 4 actions: economic prosperity, expand the tax base, continue with footprint reductions, transfer the general fund portion of the parks fee over to stormwater, and lastly, I go out to voters with a new city service fee. I'll have Gary come on up, go through the survey results, then I'll come back and put us into a little bit of our next steps, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Welcome.
Very good seeing all of you again. As you know, We recently completed a scientific survey of your electorate. Who we surveyed was the most current, a random sample of N of 300 of your most current list of registered voters. Then we broke those down into high propensity, moderate propensity, and low propensity voters. The sample size of 300 gets you a statistical margin of error of 4.5 to 5.8%. That said, I'll say right up front, a lot of people go, wow, isn't that too small? No, it has a lot to do with, with cost. And so the next slide, I should say the first slide, can I change it or did she? Okay, right here?
Yeah.
Okay. If you look at this slide, this will show you how accurate it is. One of the questions we asked the electorate was, how did you vote in November on the street maintenance bond, which, as you know, passed and got 62%, or 64.3%. So 62% of our respondents said that, in fact, they voted yes. To have a significant difference statistically is 3%. So you can see that's well within that margin of error. The reason I bring that up is if they told us the truth about this, they, I'm sure, told us the truth about everything else. So you can have confidence in what I'm about to share with you. Next slide. We were asked, would you prefer to pay a modest fee, whatever modest means to you, to avoid further cutbacks in city services. That was prefaced by an explanation of the fact that the city did make a significant, huge effort over the last 4 years to make cuts where they could without impacting seriously their services. And 61% said that they would prefer a modest fee as opposed to any other kind of funding mechanism. We specifically tested $10, and that was driven by the survey we did in July, where we actually looked at thresholds of willingness to pay. And so we concluded that $10 would be the city's definition of modest, and would the electorate then at the end of the day support that. And you can see here there's 59% support. Now, if you add the definite and the probable, we call this the SRI go, no, go model. And this is one of those controls we put in to control for sample size and to control for reality. So if you add that definite support of 43% with the 32% that said probably, that would give you 75% voter support. Most of your frankly, polling firms would be sitting here telling you have 75% voter support, and in fact, that is not the case. What we have found, what the model does, and we've been using this for well over 2 decades, and routinely it gets us either right on or within 1% of reality on election day, and certainly never more than 2%, regardless of margin of error. So what we do is we take, if somebody says, and you ask, well, is that a yes or a no, and would that be a definite yes or a probable yes? Well, if it's a definite yes, obviously one can conclude they'd be more likely to, on election, when they send in their ballot, to vote yes. If they say probably yes, I'm not sure what that means. But what we found is, and what we believe to be true, is a definite yes is about 91 to 92%. And a probable yes is well over half, well over meaning 53, 54%. So we found through the years that if you take 100% of the definites, half of the probables, that gets you to within 1 to 2% of reality. And that's benchmark. That's before any organized opposition or any informational outreach effort by the city or any third-party campaign, either for or against. So we have a benchmark here of 59%. You need a simple majority, so that's obviously very encouraging. That said, if you look at this slide, we tested a series of arguments that could easily come forward, both for and against, and so the support drops to 54%. Well, the first thing I should say about that is that at 54%, you're still okay. But where it came from is it came from the 3% from the definites, dropped 3%, and that you are concerned about, dropped a little bit on probable. So at the end of the day, what we're dealing with is 54% likely voter support. So from our perspective, it's a go. And this you can see, your electorate wants its say. Well, there's a surprise, right? Of course they do. And so we said, how do you feel about should this initiative be taken to ballot, or should City Council independently make the decision to move forward with a $10 service fee? And you can see 2/3 have said, no, let's go to ballot. We tested various arguments, and the ones that are relevant to today's discussion that are really critical is your electorate wants oversight. Again, this isn't surprising. It turns out, by the way, that there's a significant trust in your elected officials as well as your professional staff. And they have certain areas where they say, yeah, that's an appropriate decision for City Council to make. But in this case, they're saying, you know what, given all that, we would still like oversight and to have an independent oversight committee observe. And it comes down to you've heard me say this in the past, promises made, promises kept. They would just like to monitor to make sure that happens. It also, I doubt, comes as a big surprise that they would like, nearly 70%, 69%, would be more likely to support if you placed a cap. In other words, the $10, up to $10, but you cap it at $10. That is all about looking at, hey, you spend your money the way you said you would, and you don't go beyond what we've authorized. This is huge. And again, this is very normal, pardon me. They would like they meaning your electorate, would like to see you be as specific as you can about how that money is going to be spent. So you have nearly 3/4 or 73% says, I would be more likely to support if restrictions were spent on how this money could be spent, and therefore they'd be assured that services would be protected as promises. Because remember, what this is about is maintenance. It's about maintaining status quo. It's about not having to make further cuts. And so they're willing to dip into their own pocket to make sure that you don't make additional cuts, if at all possible. We also looked at should it be a service fee or should it be a modest increase in property tax. And one of the advantages to a property tax from the electorate's perspective in Oregon is it's a 5-year sunset. And yet you have 52% that said, no, we would prefer the city service fee. Now that 52% becomes extremely important, probably more important than just looking at that slide would suggest. Remember after arguments we said you'd have a 54% support? Well, this is 52. So again, you have confidence that you will have over a simple majority. So that's the intelligence that we think is relevant to this discussion.
And you'll have let me go through next steps, and we'll have an opportunity to quiz Gary if you want to. So next steps, really there are two things that we would want to be doing. Bring back 2 ordinances for your consideration. One is that first one, which really just changes the ordinance, the current stormwater ordinance that allows that fee to also be used for parks. And there would be some caveats on that around a cap and all those kinds of things as well. And then a second ordinance that we would recommend get referred to the voters, get put out to the voters for a new city service fee. And again, there would be caps and oversight committees and things like that would also be a part of that conversation depending on where you wanted to head. And then just from a timeline perspective, the key for us here, or the key is, in order to put something on the May 2013 ballot, if you choose to do that, the council would need to make a decision no later than February 13th. And so if you'll take a look at that, what we'd be hoping to do is come back in the January 14 work session to get more specific direction on ordinances. We would draft those. Remember, there's 2 different ones. If you choose to continue down that road, have a work session on the 28th, public hearing, and then 1 or 2 work sessions to make some final decisions on referring to a vote the new service fee and implementing an ordinance on the stormwater fee. So, with that, Mayor.
So I get from this that what you heard from people is they're willing to do, or at least a majority of them are willing to do a fee for keeping existing services, which means no new services.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's what, no new services. And did you do anything that defined or got to or what kind of services they're interested in?
Yeah, actually, there's three in order of priority. Clearly, number one is economic development. They are very concerned with jobs. They want to do anything, they want the city to do anything it can do to nurture and attract new business and industry to the community. Very concerned about public safety. Clearly, they don't want, the police cut back, the fire services cut back. They feel very secure, and they'd like to keep it that way. And so that was the second. And the third was an interesting one. It has to do with human services, but I can tell you in particular it had to do with the homeless, providing services to assist your homeless in Eugene. So those are the three major areas of concern.
So just to follow up on that, would you
Yes, ma'am.
would you consider, since John said in his discussion with us that we're looking at existing services, not meaning those additional dollars that we put in place for the homeless, and yet this might indicate that they would be looking to us to put money in for
What
these
I would say,
services?
I'll let you, I think those one-time dollars you put in would be part of the portfolio, and I think would be considered as maintaining those into the future.
Okay, that's what.
So that would be, I would say that as part of a maintenance effort of services going forward.
John beat me
A
to
little different than I understood in your presentation.
and John, let me make a comment on that. John beat me to the punch on that. That actually reinforces your decision to put those one-time monies in. Your electorate really appreciates that, and as John said, they want to keep them in place. Yes.
Very important information. Mike, and then Pat, and then Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the work and appreciate your being here to help us through it and understand
My
it
pleasure.
very much. I heard you mention 300 in-tab on it.
Yes.
I assume it was probably split out to evenly match demographic profile.
Well, it's sort of the other way around. We had a random sample as opposed to a stratified sample, and it was a random sample of your electorate. We did not, sometimes, often in fact, we will limit it to high moderate propensity voters. We didn't in this case. We did the electorate at large, so the number I presented today was the electorate at large. Everybody, not just high moderate propensity
Registered, not likely.
voters. Well, in the most current, yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
And did you split it out by council ward?
Yes, we absolutely have it split out by ward and by demographics, psychographics, and geographics, ward. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir, very much.
You're welcome.
All right, Pat?
Thank you. Dr. Manras, I have a couple of questions that follow up on Councillor Clark. Why did you not use likely voters?
Well, because this was a benchmark, and we felt, and with a sample size of 300, we could pull out the likely voters, both high and moderate propensity voters, together and separately, as well as your low propensity voters. But in terms of policy decision-making, before council makes a decision of whether to move forward or not, we felt that, and John felt that, he was correct, by the way, that you would want to know what your electorate at large, where they're coming from, and then you would also like to know the subsets of likely voters versus unlikely voters. And in a benchmark survey, we can do that and should do that. So it's a question of appropriate policy, we believe.
And so you feel confident that we can be confident in these numbers
Absolutely.
based upon the fact that these people may or may not vote?
Well, and the interesting part, and that's probably why you saw, even though it wasn't significantly different, you saw that we asked them, how did you vote in November? And that was almost right on to what reality is, and that included surveying your low propensity voters. So if you take those low propensity voters and drop them out, by the way, it turns out it's almost exactly right on.
A little question regarding how they voted in November. You had 64.3 was the actual vote, and you polled at 62%.
Correct.
Comparing those equal numbers. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the 64.3, that's the people who voted yes on the measure.
That is correct.
Compared to approximately 36 who voted no.
That's correct.
Whereas on
Who said they voted no?
on your polling number of 62 yes, but only 19% no, yet didn't add in the unsure, refused, and the did not vote into that.
Yeah, and because some people just aren't comfortable answering that question. The question is, if you're comfortable telling us how you voted, and there's another factor here that I'm sure you're hinting at, and you're right, and that is the further away from Election Day you get, the less accurate your data will be, because people either don't remember or they get inclined to be influenced by the outcome. So when it's 2%, I mean, it's amazing. You go, okay, they're telling the truth.
So but my question was regarding the 64.3 was, it didn't, beyond the 64.3 said yes, and the 36%, 35.7 said no. There was also a undervote, people who did not vote.
That's correct.
So that really is subtracted from both numbers.
Well, it is, but the number who I'm interested in is if you said you voted yes, from this sample,
Yeah.
how many said they voted yes to actually we know what the outcome was. That's our measure of confidence.
Okay.
So I don't really pay, in all candor, a whole lot. I report it, but I don't pay a lot of attention to the rest, because we just assume what we really care about is did they vote yes? Did they tell us the truth? And the reason we're asking this question is to see that if this is accurate in terms of how many voted yes, what ratio, then everything else in the survey is. If this was not accurate, I would have been worried about the validity of the findings.
So then you don't
Wasn't.
believe that the 62 is versus 19, whereas the 64 is versus
Yeah, it doesn't-
36?
I don't think it's relevant.
And I'm trying to paint a picture of your confidence in your numbers, and you're doing a very good job of responding, by the way.
Well, thank you.
The other question that I have is regarding, I've not seen the survey instrument that you use, but did you ask voters to take into account any competitive measures that may be on the same ballot?
Actually, we did, and that table itself is highly complex to interpret, but we did. And we looked at basically three, and the big one obviously is the county. That's, if they come forward with their measure. And the answer is this: it will have an effect, but your measure will survive.
Okay.
So this is, I'm comfortable sitting here telling you that, yes, it's going to absolutely have an effect if you have multiple measures, because you add it up and you go, wait a minute, how much tax am I willing to support? But yours will, in our professional opinion, will secure a simple majority vote, and my guess is it's not going to be below 52, but it's probably closer to 54, even with other measures on the ballot.
So you would anticipate some erosion based on
Absolutely.
the fact that people will choose between one ballot and the other.
And that's reality.
But not sufficient erosion to drop it below the 50%.
Thank you, sir.
plus
You're
one.
far more articulate than I am, yes. That is correct.
I don't think that.
I do.
Thank you. Okay. Good. I may have another question, but
I
that's...
just wanted to clarify about what your measure and our measure might be.
Which hat are you wearing there, Pam?
Just
I am a city
joking.
councilor.
Sorry, couldn't resist. Chris, you're up.
Thank you. I really appreciate you doing this survey. I appreciate this following up on the one you did before. The trend is a very
you,
helpful
sir,
thing.
yes.
And instead of trying to parse the numbers, because I'm feeling good about what the work you've done, is I look at this and say, okay, what have I learned as a result of doing this survey? I mean,
Exactly.
that's really the most important thing.
Absolutely, sir.
And I think for me, some things that I get from this that I've learned, some things that I would have guessed, are that, yeah, voters want to be able to have a say in what happens.
Absolutely.
And I think that gets to my second point, which is our success at this or any other thing that we do depends on the confidence that our community has in us.
Absolutely.
And the sense I have is that because of hard work, we have established a level of confidence that we absolutely cannot betray. This is built on that confidence. I think our road bond was a way to build on that confidence. Some of the decisions we've been working to make have built on that confidence. I see this survey result as being an extension of that confidence, and we need to act very, very carefully in order to preserve that even as we do this. And when you ask about having oversight in it and some of the other natural mechanisms that people would see as a demonstration of good faith,
Yes, sir.
I think that is absolutely what makes this work. So for me, I'm pleased we've done this. I absolutely want to continue the conversation about a fee. I think it is worthwhile to continue the conversation in that context, that we would do it in a way that preserves and maintains the confidence that we've built. With that in mind, we need to be very thoughtful about what our community would expect this to be used for. So for me, one of the most important takeaways from this is, yeah, I think they want to preserve their community. I think everybody wants to keep their community whole and successful, to not see it die, but they don't want it to be wasteful or frivolous. And so what we choose to put in here then becomes the most critical element. And I know that some of us have been talking about different kinds of funding mechanisms for many, many years. And I see some of the things that the people are saying in this as being consistent with some of the conversations we've been having. So it's not outside my comfort level in terms of what we know we need versus what the community intuitively feels we need. That's a good nexus for us.
You're right.
And so I think as we proceed with the conversation, it's important that we mix together what the community senses we need to do and what we as the people that are working on these issues on a daily basis and know what needs to be done. Finding that commonality will not be that hard to do, but I think we need to communicate it very clearly, and that's what this survey says to me we need to do it. But I think we can make that work, and so I'm very pleased with the results of the survey and I think what it's implying. So we should, I think, keep moving forward with this conversation.
Let me make two comments on your comments. First, and this is so critical, if at least 80 to 90% of the findings aren't exactly what you knew they would be, because you know your constituents, then you have reason to have doubt in the findings. So when you read something and you go, yeah, I knew that makes sense, I hope so, what we're looking for are those subtleties that will make the difference. And then the second point is, actually it's 3 points. What's really neat about the findings is there are various measures we have built in that shows confidence, the electorate's confidence in the city council has gone up over time, and it's really high. They do trust. Even though they want public oversight, which is normal, they do trust, and you're doing the right things. And lastly, it's absolutely correct if you and each of you fit this. If your government does what you want them to do, then you're going to support them. And if you're going to do something else, then you're probably not going to support them, which is what really justifies this effort. So thank you for the observation.
I've got Betty, and then George, and then Alan. Betty.
Okay, first I'd like clarification
Yes,
from
ma'am.
John about the stormwater fees. Are you talking about shifting the use of stormwater fees or an additional stormwater fee?
It would be both. What it would do is there's currently general fund dollars that are supporting parks maintenance. We would shift that amount of money over to the stormwater fee, and then there would have to be a flat fee to pay for that.
To supplement it?
Yes,
You're not just talking about using our current stormwater fees?
correct.
Okay. Then I have questions. Did you ask people in the survey, did you ask about a business tax, a business license fee, or business gross receipts tax, or did you ask about specific kinds of revenue?
We did not, if I recall, we didn't do it.
We did that in July.
Yeah, that's where I was going. On this one, I don't believe we did. Why? Because we asked that in July and in the prior survey. So this was focused on one particular funding mechanism at a particular dollar value, the $10, because we had the benchmark from July.
All you're asking about is a $10 a month fee
Correct, yes, ma'am.
for everybody.
And the other thing we are asking, would you prefer city service fee versus a property tax? We did ask that. But it was still amounting to basically...
And you didn't ask about an income tax on high incomes?
We did not.
And we can get you the results in July, and I don't just remember all the results, but a lot of those didn't test out very well at all or survey out very well. There was really much more of an interest in this kind of a monthly fee. Part of what we would want to do if we were to pursue this would also ensure there's a social equity piece to it. And, eWeb, for example, has a program, their customer care program, and there are some things like that we would also want to tap into with this. And so there are people at certain income levels that would either have a reduced or substantially reduced fee on this. We'd want to make sure we're tapping into that social equity piece as well. We don't know all the details of that yet.
That's hard to do,
Which?
make it equitable. If you have a flat fee, people, you can't do it just by income. Some people have huge medical bills that,
And partly there's, EWEB has their existing system, so we'd try to use some of their existing system, and I'm not intimately familiar with that.
would it be possible to get a figure of how much we're losing from all the tax exemptions we're doing?
We
future.
can provide you the information on what is not being collected as a result of the tax
All the money
exemption,
we
yes.
could be getting if we didn't have any tax exemptions. And then how much, also I'd like to know, how much money would we get if we terminated the Riverfront Urban Renewal District?
We can, my understanding, that's about $300,000 a year. That's about what that is. But we can provide some additional support information to that number also.
Okay, thank you.
And before I go to George, I just say about that one is I think on from a council perspective, given our different perspectives on the pluses and minuses of whether you would have something that would even give you taxes back without using some of those exemptions, it is a ongoing and continuous conversation about when you're getting something that you wouldn't get otherwise, or when you're giving away something. So that's just an ongoing conversation that we have over and over again. George.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, well, speaking, just a brief comment about that. I've been hearing from probably 15 or 20 people just this last week about the article in last Sunday's New York Times about all of the monies that cities, these tax abatement programs that they got into, and how they kicked themselves because it's really put them in a terrible binds. And so that's an ongoing discussion. I think for one, I imagine other councilors would like to have copies of both of the surveys.
Absolutely.
Like the total, like the actual
Absolutely.
questions that you asked, and then all the breakdowns.
We'll provide you all that, and if you want all the crosstabs and stuff, we'll provide all of that to whomever would like that.
Good, thank you. Yeah, a lot of
We'll
my,
post it, we'll get it to you. Some way you'll have access to the whole thing.
some of my other questions are already answered, but other councilors have the same questions, so I won't go over those. I just want to kind of like throw out a note of caution, though, because the latest survey was in November, right after the election, and it looks great. It looks doable. But EWEB has since raised their rates, and so that could kind of throw a monkey wrench in some people's responses. But I just heard you say that it wouldn't actually be $10 for everybody. It'd be kind of like a sliding scale, perhaps.
I think what we would recommend is that it's $10 for everybody, but there is an opportunity for people at certain income levels to either pay a reduced fee or no fee. So that's how we would suggest.
And is this envisioned as a flat fee for every adult resident, or is it per household?
We don't know the specifics of how it actually would get charged, and so I don't know specifically. The other question I would say is, we wouldn't anticipate this fee that goes out for a vote starts at $10. So that may be a cap that gets put on to it, but it may be substantially less. Maybe it's $3 or $4 or something like that, because remember, we're just trying to maintain what we have,
Right.
and that anything beyond that in the future could be, in order to maintain what we have, do you adjust that fee or not to buy new things with that fee. And so we wouldn't anticipate that it starts off at $10 per month. We wouldn't need that. It would just, for that particular fee, right? So.
Okay. And then another thing we need to be clear about is what amount we're going to be shooting for. And of course, that would determine the rate and
Yes.
whether it could be sliding or not. And we don't know that tonight. But basically, you're just wanting our direction to move forward with this idea. And I think it's promising.
Yeah, I think what we'd want to know is if you don't want us to spend any more time on looking on these new revenues, then we will stop and not spend any more time on that. If it's, yes, we're still interested, and it's serious consideration, because we will spend quite a bit of time doing it over the next month, putting the information in much more detail together. So we would just want to know if you just really want us to stop because new revenue is not an option, then we'll stop and go from there. So,
Okay, thank you.
Alan?
Thank you, Dr. Manos. I was particularly struck with your comment about people, as they further get away from the election, that modifies their thinking about it. I think one of the more recent surveys showed that millions of people actually went to Woodstock, when that wasn't obviously true.
That's a great example.
It was good.
Some of them may-
I was going to ask you how it was.
So I agree with what Councilor Pryor said, that we have built up trust, especially with the way that we did the road fund.
Precisely.
And I agree that we need to have the oversight, and I agree that it needs to be specific, meaning that it's dedicated
Yes.
to specific items. So it's an either-or thing. It's a proposition to the voters that says, these are the services. If we're going to keep them, it costs this much money. And I agree with all of that. I'm kind of interested in the depth of support or opposition and how far down into that you got. On slide 25, the post-argument slide, where it said, now that you've heard several arguments, and it dropped a little bit, and some of it came out of the definitely yes. That prompted my thinking about how strong are those definite yeses and how strong is the definite no's.
I'm not sure how to answer that. What I can say is, out of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, out of 11 arguments that were tested, 9 of them ended up generating more support. And some of them, for example, we have called that a boomerang effect, that it was designed, the assumption would be that it would cause the electorate to not to oppose, be more inclined to impose, and yet it didn't. And what happens is you can cross the threshold of believability. And they go, oh, come on, that can't be true, and therefore, and the reason you want to test those kinds of arguments is to not only understand what the likely outcome will be, but which ones to be concerned about and which ones you don't be concerned about. And we had 2 of them that were negative, and that would shift it backwards. And one of them, for example, was the funds generated through this increase would be dedicated solely to parks, recreation, swimming pools, and library services. And that, there's a little counterintuitive until you think about it, and then you go, wait a minute, that makes some sense. But it was only a negative shift of 0.3. So that argument doesn't matter. So the bottom line is, because, and here really is the bottom line. You have, through proper management, you have gained the confidence of your constituency. So when you say, and how you did that, by the way, one of the drivers of that was you did make cutbacks without cutting back on services. You cut back expenses. You left certain positions open, for example, that when people retire, you didn't fill them. John did many things and his staff under your direction to make balance that budget year after year after year. So since you've done that and you haven't significantly cut back services, and in fact, like homeless, you've done one-time expenditures to improve that, and others, it's like, okay, my city council gets it. And so when you come back now and say, we've done all we can do, and if it goes further, one of 2 things has to happen. There has to be additional revenue, or there has to be cutbacks that are significant that's going to impact my quality of life, and we asked that particular question. They're coming back and going, we believe city council, and we don't want our quality of life impacted. And that's why they're not talking about new services. They're talking about maintaining status quo. And on the 3 things that your mayor asked about, it's really about economic development and jobs. And it's about public safety, keeping your police and fire. And then you have a very human component here, a huge concern over your homeless. And that's where they're at. And so if you're on that page, they're with you.
So since we have you here, what's your experience? How do we convey these messages? How do we, the specific ones, that what we've done already, that we've done all this stuff, and John and staff have done an amazing job of being efficient, doing things differently, and cutting some services without impacting services dramatically. And the other message, what's this for, and how do we avoid the blackmail argument, which is you only put things on the list that we like so that you know we won't want to cut them.
Which is one of the reasons they say they want oversight. They want to make sure promises made, promises kept. They want to make sure what you actually do, and that's why they want things earmarked. And so we want to make sure you keep your word. But the fact is, unless you violate your word, they're going to trust you, and it will reinforce. But let me bring up another point. I thought you were going at a slightly different place. I'm going to say something that's going to sound terribly and I apologize, egocentric. It's not meant to. Research is not an end product. It's a means to an end. I'm blessed with a wonderful staff, far more competent than I. We have 5 behavioral scientists, 4 quantitative, 1's qualitative. You know who I am? I have 2 PhDs, by the way. One of them you and I share. It's called the School of Hard Knocks. I went out and built a career and then went back to learn the scholarship and the research and the empiricism. And the reason I did that is we learned in my profession what to do, which buttons to push to get desired outcomes, but what I didn't know was why. And that's what I went back to learn the whys and to learn the empiricism. Well, the reason I say that is in the process, I've been the number 2 on the West Coast for the largest PR agency in the world. And I've been VP of the largest state trade association in the world on external and internal communications. So what my role in this personally is just to do what you were suggesting. The question is, how do you get that information out? Now, the answer has changed big time in the last 3 years. It's now social media. It is. And so how you get that message out, you create the dialogue, you work it off which I know you do, you work it off your website, you start, Facebook becomes a player, blogs become part of the discussion. But I'm telling you, it's amazing. It's going up and up and up, the role of social media. For example, we just did one in November. Are you ready for this? 87% voter support. And we started, and it was going to fail. The whole thing was done through social media. In other words, and I liked your question, transparency. Be very candid. Put all the information out there, the good, the bad, the ugly. Tell them what you want to do, using the appropriate mechanisms to do that. That includes, of course, traditional media, press, your local press, and all the rest. But social media is going to play a huge role, and that will create a discussion, and it's a whole new ballgame today. But I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
But I would just also expand, Alan, on that, and this reverts back to the mayor's conversation earlier about some of those one-time dollars. Is the council has approved one-time dollars for homeless services. So part of the question is, do you want to continue to maintain those or not? I think that's not a blackmail question. I think there's one-time dollars here. Do you want to turn it into ongoing funding or not? If the answer is no, that's fine. We just won't do that piece going forward. So that doesn't feel like it's sort of the blackmail piece, because I think we'd be very upfront about that's what's currently one time. They're not planned to be funded into the future unless we choose collectively as a community to maintain that service going forward.
But you have to have, and the key is you have to have the ongoing discussion. One of the things that, and as you know, I work with cities, counties, special districts, states throughout the United States. One of the things that so many government agencies do wrong is they only talk to their constituents when they want something. That's a mistake. So you're talking about your one-time expenditure for homeless. This is a hot button for your electorate and, frankly, for the community at large. And so you should be reminding them. You don't just forget it and go down here next. No, let's continue to discuss what you've been doing. Part of the reason you've got the findings here is that, and we did in the survey, we reminded the respondent, these are the things the city has done. And it was like, oh, yeah, that's true. I remember that. And so we're assuming that 59% and that 54% assumes that you remind your constituents what you've done and where you're at and why you're there, and then you get to the discussion of, and the consequences are very real. We've done everything we could for the past 4 years, and now we have two choices. We cut back services, that impacts your quality of life, or we find a way to generate additional funds through a modest, and modest turns out to be $10.
So,
Good question, thank you. That was a great question.
the math on the fee,
Yes, sir.
if we wanted to collect $6 million, depends who we charge this to and how we do it. Have you thought about that? And is it just, what about businesses and how would this, and what's the mechanism for collecting the fee? Have you gone down that path?
We haven't gone down
Step.
far enough down that path that I'd be comfortable answering, because it would be a little bit too off the cuff. And so those are all the kinds of things we're going to have to work through in order to come back.
There is one thing we learned from the July study that's relevant to your question, and that is anything you do that would impede or discourage economic development and new jobs, if you will, is not favored. So a business tax, for example, is perceived by your voters being, one more roadblock to getting people, or one more barrier to getting new business to come in town. That would not be embraced, I can assure you. So, John will deal with how you do it, but I can tell you how you don't do it. You don't do it with the business tax.
So at this point, I like what I've seen. I think we need to keep going down this path, and I would like to find out what the answers to those questions I just asked were. So,
Yeah, there'll be that and many. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So I'm in favor of keeping going.
I just want to make one comment about this section, John, that you had in the slides on and that you just mentioned, Dr. Mann-Ross, about how have we done it, how we've cut. I think in addition to showing we good faith effort on our part, in addition to the road bond discussion, all that, and building trust, I think that part of this is for the voter to feel like they've been asked to cut back. They've been asked to take a lot of changes in their lives and to do with less. And so it really matters to them to see that we've gone through the same thing that they've had to go through in their personal lives, that we haven't skated through this and we've made the same kinds of stringencies and efforts that people have to do in their own lives to cope with the recession. And I think it's all of these are, we've cut our budget, we've eliminated positions, we've maintained reserves, we've ended up doing what we consider to be really bad stuff, is cutting our park maintenance and our library hours. So we have... Hello?
Conference stopped, it said.
Okay. So I think that's also a demonstration of trust, because they've trusted you that you're going to make the same effort that they personally have to make in their personal lives.
Mayor, when you're right, you're right.
Thank you. Okay, next round is, I've got Pat and Mike and George. Pat.
I'll pass.
Okay. Mike?
I just wanted to know the date or the dates that you did the survey.
I didn't write it down.
November here, but
Yeah, it was November. May I get that to you so I get exactly, but I will give you that information. I almost called staff and I said, somebody's going to ask that question. And I didn't write it down. And normally I have it.
Just
I apologize.
because, events and time.
Absolutely. I will fire that off to your city manager.
Any snapshot in time is representative of that date.
But, one thing we do that is different is we spend more time doing the survey than most polling firms. They just get it until the end is done. We don't. We, as you'll recall, we gather some in the morning, some at night, some on weekends, some during the week, because people have different lifestyles, and some people work on weekends, and some people don't. So we had more days than normal, and it was distributed appropriately, and I will get you that information.
Well, in my professional life, I see a lot of polling, and I know that you do.
Yes, I know you do.
Work,
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate it.
But I will get you that.
I would say, though, from my perspective, I'm sure I'm in the minority in this, but I would suggest and believe that we should not pursue and continue this. But that's my opinion.
Okay, George.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I think that the survey results are very encouraging, and I think we should move ahead with this and keep studying this. I also think that, we need to be like with the road repair issue. And we won't be able to be as specific with this as we were with that. I mean, obviously, there's X number of streets in town, and it takes so much to repair them, and you're asking for so much money over a 4-year period. So that you can get pretty tight with that. And then you've got the oversight committee. But given that, we need to be as specific as we can within each of these areas, economic development, what's that mean? Public safety, what does that mean? How many dollars, and what's it going to go for? People are going to want to see real specific, proposals. And then homelessness also. I just think that's so wonderful that was the third most frequent concern. That's really great. Hopefully we'll be able to do something really significant there. Rather than people just think, oh, well, they're just going to get this money and it's just going to go into a slush fund and they're just going to do whatever they want to with it, which is not the case, of course, but people could have that perception. So we'll just, as we keep going forward with this, we'll just have to be get it as tight as we can.
You need to be diligent.
Understanding that it won't be exact in any one of these categories, but we should make it as exact as we can to gain people's trust.
The more detailed you are, the better.
And then perform the first year, and they'll see, wow, great. They'll see it didn't get any worse. I don't know if and that's what we're aiming at here.
Status quo. That's what it means.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I apologize for being late. I had obligations at work. Got here as soon as I could, and I will endeavor to go online and watch the presentation that you made, so I'll get the full background. But I really appreciate the conversation that I've heard so far, and as I expressed the last time this was discussed, I am in support of us looking for new revenues. Again, as a member of the Budget Committee and the chair for 2 years, very familiar with our deficit and the options we have to address it, and I really appreciate the mayor's analogy of personal households have had to cut back, and we've had to figure out how to make do with less, and there comes a point where you then look around to how are we going to generate some more revenue for our personal household, what side projects might we take on, and I wouldn't say a new fee is a side project, but I think it's just smart of us to be thinking about how we can arrange different pieces to deal with that deficit, and this would be one of the pieces. It wouldn't be the one solution. So I agree with Councilor Brown, and I'm sure some other folks said the same thing about specificity and being as clear about what the money will be used for. But I do also share Councilor Zelenka's concern about making sure that we're putting things forward that aren't framed in such a way that people feel like they're being held hostage to their favorite program that the city offers. I think that is a place that folks can go depending on how you frame things, and we should be aware of that. So I look forward to seeing the next iteration of this topic.
I guess what the other point that I would make here is that after listening to you guys, I just want to be sure that we don't convey a mixed message. If we're saying that we are going to try to have enough money so we don't lose services, I don't want people to think they're going to, if we get it, it's additional money to do additional things. And I think, so it's not like, oh boy, we're going to pass something and we're going to be able to do blah, 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 because what we're really going to be able to do, hopefully, is as much as we've been doing if we go down this path. So there's a very sort of careful balance between not overselling and giving people either worrying or expectations that you're going to do something different than you said you were going to do.
That was the underlying assumption of this study, by the way. Perfectly clear. It was about status quo, maintaining what you have. We're real clear about that.
Right, and I just want to be sure we're clear. And I actually, because this is such an important thing, and I know we're far from making a decision, and the only thing you're being asked to do tonight is to say, do you want to pursue this and let them go to work and come back with some more information? I would actually honestly suggest you put a motion out there and get people to actually say they want to keep moving forward, so you can see where we all are in that very limited way of at least all, whoever is for moving forward, that we're able to say that. I think that's helpful for how we go from here. Alan?
Well, with that, I move
No,
forward.
you said you want to be last.
I move forward. I move that we move forward on the path that identified by the city manager for the financial strategy.
Second.
If I could speak to it.
Yep, and then Pat wants to talk before we do it.
Okay.
And Betty does too.
So on that last point, I think being specific is critically important here. When we did the bond measure, I think the credibility and trust we earned was we said we were going to do something and we did what we said we were going to do. And that we actually got lucky and were able to do more, so that's great. In this case, I think what we need to do is come up with a list of things that are on the chopping block that are if we chose to go to $6 million, full $6 million, that these things are the things that we will not able to do if we don't have additional revenue, and they will go away, and then we cannot then come back and say, well, the thing that bugs me more about governments and other agencies is then they say, oh, well, then we found this other money, and we restored part of this and restored part of that, and I don't want to play that game. If we're going to put a list out there and say this is what this is for, and if people say no, then those things go away. And I think it's that kind of straightforward deal you make with people, and that being that honest and being that clear is what would make this successful, I think, in the end. Anything to add about that, Dr.?
Well, absolutely. The way I talk about it's a little crude, I suppose. Don't pull your gun unless you're prepared to pull the trigger. I can tell you, you're absolutely right. For those government agencies that lay that consequence down and then find a way that it's not true, you lose the electorate loses total confidence in their leadership and in their electeds. There's a city in Southern California right now. I take my hat off to them. It was sad, but they said that November ballot it failed, and guess what? They've already shut down 2 fire stations and taken some cops out. And boy, it was a shock to the. Whoa, you mean you meant it? Yeah, we weren't kidding. So you're right. I mean,
right.
Be specific.
I don't like your metaphor, but I like what you say. Yeah, I think we have to mean what we say and do what we say.
Say what you mean what you say.
What was your motion? Alan, did you put a motion?
Oh, yeah, move to continue down the path for the financial strategy as outlined by the city manager.
And did you get a second?
Yes.
Okay.
2
All right.
seconds.
2 seconds. All right. 2 seconds is good. I've got Pat, and then Betty, and then Mike.
Third.
Thank you, Mayor. To the motion. A couple of things. Dr. Manros, you spoke about the confidence that this council has established in the voting public, in the electorate, and you talked about the fact that we made cuts in spending without adding taxes on an ongoing basis. I think it's important for us to remember that we have built that confidence. It's not a good thing to erode the confidence by doing exactly what Councilor Zelenko was saying, for one thing, and then also that is saying that we're going to cut this if we don't get the money, and then not cutting it when we don't get the money. So significantly, we need to maintain that confidence that we have built, and the other thing that you said, Dr. Manros, that I'd like to elaborate on a little bit more is that you talked about taxing businesses, and that there's a pretty strong feeling in the general public that by taxing businesses we are attacking jobs. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, first, let me make 2 comments on your first comment and your second comment. On your first comment, one of the some of the empirical evidence that suggests I know that the electorate has confidence in city council. One of the questions we ask was assuming a new monthly fee or property tax were to be levied by the city, which of the following methods for determining how the money should be invested do you prefer? One was to city council determine 100% how that money's spent versus dedicate the opposite, dedicate 100% of the money to specific expenditures versus dedicate a portion to the specific expenditures and allow city council to control the balance. And that 42% chose, be specific, but let city council, 17% said 100% city council controls that, 37% said dedicate 100% of it. So that shows you right there, and there's other pieces of empiricism that shows that that's growing. Now, with respect to I hope I'm articulate on this, what I said is I'm certain that one of your top three, and technically your top concern, the collective concern with your electorate, is over economic development and jobs. And they anything that gets in the way of that would discourage new business from coming into your community, they do not support, because they see that as being, wait a minute, you're not allowing new jobs to come into our community. And if therefore it goes logically that, well, and you put a tax on, or make it more difficult to get a business license, put more taxes on the business license, whatever you do that creates an additional barrier or increases the existing barrier is not well received by your electorate. So I'm pretty sure your Chamber of Commerce would agree with that. I believe your city managers had quite a few conversations with your chamber. So point is, all I was trying to say is, as you move forward and make hard decisions, always at least ask yourself, how is it going to affect economic development in the city of Eugene?
Thank you. And I think, John, you're sitting next to him, so I'm sure you heard what he said. In response to Councilor Zelenka's to his question, you said that it would be off the cuff to make in response to how we are specifically going to address the fee,
right,
and who's going to pay it, and how it's going to be leveraged and reduced to give a level of progressivity to the fee. So a part of that is making certain that people don't get the impression that we are preventing businesses, or we are hindering businesses from creating jobs. I think one thing, if this council does decide to move forward, it's important to understand, and I know you all do, that each one of us is influential in helping people gain or lose trust in a particular measure that comes out of this council. So each of us has a group of people who kind of rely on us to be their main barometer of trust. And so it's important that we do as much together as we can if we want to make anything that comes out of the council work. Now, back a couple of months ago, right up there on that dais, the county commission, and you were sitting down here, Dr. Manros, decided not to put a ballot measure on in November because they weren't getting unanimous support, or close to unanimous 4 out of 5 support from the county commissioners. And I think that in order to produce the numbers that your polling states, I think it's important that people believe that we are consolidated or close to consolidated behind it. And also, the one last thing I will point out is that there will be competition, and that some of the competition is daunting. Prisoners being turned out at 4th and Charnelton on a daily basis is daunting. Thank you, Mayor.
Big time.
Betty?
Okay, I have first a comment. I'm disappointed we're not talking about an income tax, which I think is the fairest tax of all, and on higher incomes, that is. And then I want some clarification. You're talking about 2 kinds of fees, I think, a $10 pot, up to a $10 a month for everybody, and a new stormwater fee, correct?
There's 2 different fees with that. I don't know what the actual numbers would be, and we haven't gone through all of that calculation.
Would the stormwater fee then be something that we pass, and the $10 up to $10 a month would be something we put on the ballot, or would we put the stormwater fee on the ballot too?
My proposal will be is that the council approve the stormwater and the transfer dollars by ordinance, that would not go to the ballot, and that a new fee, because that's not a new fee, but a new fee would actually go to the ballot. The first one is the ordinance would allow the stormwater fund to collect the money for the parks maintenance, so it's not a new fee.
It would just be, that would just be transferring.
You're transferring those general fund the equivalent general fund dollars over to the stormwater That's correct.
And I have a comment about encouraging businesses, too. I think that the kind of businesses we would want might be willing to help support the city. And I think we should be very careful about saying we just want to recruit businesses that don't pay a living wage, because that just gives us more people who need social services, which is already a big problem. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to disagree just rating the list that you mentioned, Alan. Despite, I think, the degree to which we would want people to say a definite yes or no based on that list, I think people have their own reasons for why they say yes or no. And I think that wanting them to look at that and say, fine, if you say no, this will go away, I would think there could be a whole host of other reasons why they would say no. And it might be alternative spending proposals, or them looking at what we've done and saying, well, but these are a limited field of choices, and I would have not spent the money on that over there that you did instead, and so I'm just voting no because you wasted that money over there, or you didn't take advantage of that money over there. So I hope we don't present the electorate with that, what I would call kind of a false choice.
Chris?
We're getting into the details of the measure here. We haven't even put it together yet. Interestingly, I am similar to what you're saying. I would take the community at their word. They wanted the degree of specificity where their confidence is maintained, but they have the confidence that says, I'll give you some latitude, and that's what we have built. So I think coming up with something that has sufficient detail in it to convey what it is we want to do, but they want us to have flexibility if they have confidence. I mean, flexibility is an element I think they're looking for if they have confidence. This is all based on that. The second point to make is, well, I think it is useful to let people know what the consequences are and be honest about what the consequences are if something were to happen. Oftentimes, consequences is not the best way to approach inspiring people. It's hard to inspire people with the pit they will fall into.
It's a threat.
I tend to want to inspire people with the hill they can climb and the success they can achieve. So I think as we talk about what this can do, I think we can talk to some degree about what we can preserve. I think that is an important element of it, what this allows us to preserve. I think at the same time, we need to also talk about what this can allow us to achieve. Particularly around economic development, because I think people say we can continue to pursue the things that result in jobs. We can continue to pursue the things that result in us feeling and being safe and secure in our homes. We can continue to pursue the things that will provide for the people in our community who need that. That's the approach. Not to say we're going to lay off a bunch of somebody if you don't pass this. I don't want to have to follow through on that any more than anyone else does, but like Councilor Salinka says, you don't want to mislead the public. But I want us to make sure we talk about this from the standpoint of where I think the community is, which is, yeah, I will go with you if we can go to a good place. I don't want to just stay away from a bad place. I want to go to a good place. I've had the opportunity to talk to a few hundred people in the community, asking them what kind of community they want to live in. And they don't tell me all the things they don't want. They tell me the things they do want. And I think the basis for this fee can be the ability for us to continue to provide the people of this community with the things they want and the things they depend on us to provide for them. And we can do that. And we have worked hard to be the body that can do that for them. So I don't want them to look at us and say, this is the body that takes things away from me. This is the body that provides things that can make my community better. And yeah, there's a consequence. We have to talk about the consequence, but not dwell on it.
That's my point. I do not disagree with you, but you cannot eliminate or ignore the consequence.
Agreed.
It's got to be built in.
It's got to be both.
So I just want to say two things before we vote. One is to thank you for the presentation on the survey and to thank our staff for putting some very intriguing, interesting proposals in front of us. I would encourage us to go further and try to explore this and see where it takes us. So with that, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor of Alan's motion, please indicate.
Madam Mayor, may I ask a repeat of the motion, please?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
that we continue to move down the path for the financial strategy as described by the city manager.
All right, and so, all those in favor, please, yes?
I apologize, Mayor, I forgot one piece that I wanted to mention there. I am in favor of several of these strategies, and voted on as a package, I want to say no, because I believe it's the wrong way to go for us to increase both these fees. But there are a number of pieces of this and a number of strategies that I do agree with, so I wish we could look at a different way to put our blessing on it or not than the way it's presented in that motion.
So, given that comment, I would only say to all of you that, and to the public, that you are not endorsing anything at this stage. If you should decide to vote to have staff pursue this, that is all you are doing, is asking for more information. You are not signing on the dotted line for anything at all. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 1. It passes. Thank you all, and we'll see you at 7:30.
How do you say it's not a